Great to have her.
Oh, good.
Would you like to discover powerful ways to drive change in your organization? Would you like to learn about the latest concepts in people strategy, HR effectiveness, and optimization that will help your organization achieve a competitive advantage in your industry? Then HRBP MBA Masterclass with Ron Thomas is for you. With today's uncertain business landscape, HR leaders now play a pivotal role in what some say is a paradigm shift in the industry. This comprehensive 3-day program, in-person or virtual, will empower you to embrace a more strategic mindset, enhance your decision-making skills, and help your organization to the next level. To register as a group or individual, email us at info@strategyfocusgroup.com or visit our website at www.strategyfocusgroup.com.
Good morning, good evening, depending upon what part of the world you're in. If it's Friday, it is the CEO series. Today, I am live from Mumbai, India, which I've been here attending the World HRD Congress. As you know, we bring together global leaders, innovators, disruptors from across the globe each Friday at 6 p.m. Dubai time, 9 a.m. USA time. So welcome, everyone. Our guest today is a friend of mine, Mark Pfister, who's the CEO and Chief Board Consultant at A Pfister Strategy Group. Executive advisory firm serves as strategic advisory council for executives and boards. Our discussion today will be around boards. He's also chairman and CEO of the Integral Board Group, a specialized board services and consulting company. He prides himself on being a coach and mentor to senior executives and directors board directors circles. He has earned the nickname of the board architect, which I love that architect piece because that means you're putting it all together. So Mark, welcome from New York City.
Ron, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for the invite.
Yeah, thank you for agreeing to make this. So you're branded as the board architect. And I love the concept because in human resources, I tell people we're workforce architects. So I get that piece. So what is board advisory? Give us kind of some insight on what that is.
Sure. So our organization, specifically in the advisory and the consulting space, focuses in 3 areas. And just at the high level, we are a professional speaking group, and we are focused on senior leadership as well as the board directorship space, which is obviously a hot area right now, as you can imagine. Yeah. Then in our second vertical or focus area is the consulting and advisory. That ranges everything from building out nominating committee processes and participating in the vetting and the interviewing and the appointment process, to areas that focus on proper structuring of boards. And we like to call that board architecture, for the main reason that architecture is proactive. You have a proactive plan. You're designing that board in such a way that allows for it to be effective and efficient, not just what we view as the reactive side to it of just describing your structure. That's number 2. And number 3 is our education and certification. We have created and run a global board certification. We see this now listed in company proxy statements around the world. And it truly is a differentiator in that it's focused on the global board director mindset, not regional. We view most board education programs as focusing on regional disclosure laws and transparency. We believe that today's director has to truly have a global and international mindset. We see this through supply chains and remote workforces. These are all global entities and global impacts that every director, whether you're a director of a small startup company or a director of an international public company, we view that as very important. So those are our 3 areas, Ron, that we focus.
Okay, cool. So if I were to backtrack, say 10 years ago, how would company in the older state choose a board member? What criteria is different then than it is now?
Sure.
How would you advise an organization for that?
Yeah, and there's really two sides to this. One is not only how the board is searching, finding, and appointing directors, but it's also how today's board candidates package themselves, how they interview, and how they've trained themselves. What are they actually bringing to the board, so they're not only viewed as what we say is the one-trick pony, right? The one expertise area that they've packaged themselves. So from the board's lens, yes, we've always heard of the friends and family type of appointment. And in disclosure, full disclosure on that, boards really didn't have many options in the past other than reaching out to some of the larger search and placement organizations. So they did rely very heavily on those that they knew and those that they trusted, right? If they had worked on previous boards or served on previous boards. Today is much different in that many board directors are not open to, they'll make the recommendation, but they by no means want to be in a biased way or viewed as biased and actually forcing the appointment through. So typically boards today will put their recommended or referred candidate into the nominating committee funnel to make sure that it's done in a proper way.
Okay.
And boards are truly looking for more depth of knowledge today. We call this their horizontal experience areas, or in our formal packaging in the course, we differentiate between what we call that person's packaging major and their 3 minors. And we can talk a little bit more about that in a few moments. But that's the board directorship lens, or the board itself looking for the candidate lens.
Okay.
Flipping this to the board candidate side, as I started to mention, there's a whole different way in what we view as modern board director packaging. And it truly is knowing that you don't send a resume or a CV for a board role. You send what are called board documents. They're very different in the way they're structured. They point out the strategy and governance prowess and experience that you have. And they also bring to the surface board and board related areas that are more easily found instead of digging through a resume or CV. It brings those earlier in the process of saying who you are.
Okay.
So yeah.
Now, the follow-up question to that is that your advisory, is that in connecting to the executive search firms, or a part of your portfolio is executive search?
We do not get involved in the search area. As a matter of fact, a large portion of our referral work comes from search firms from around the globe. And that's both for understanding which candidates they could actually cherry pick from our graduates, number one, that would fit the profiles they're looking for. But also many of these organizations actually send their board candidates to us to train them in such a way, and this is for aspiring or experienced directors that need to be packaged more so in a modern way. And make note, you asked the question earlier about the difference between 10 years ago and today. There is a very early indicator in someone, even in the way they submit their board documents. Again, hopefully not being a resume or a CV, but truly their board documents, which are different structures. In making that first impression, how do they make the best impression for the client that search firm, that placement firm is looking to put that candidate in front of that client?
Okay. So your firm plays a dual role, advisory here, and as well as putting people through that process of understanding something as simple as packaging. Because I laugh, because that's not like sending a CV over and a resume over and say, take a look at what I've done here.
That's right. That's right. And those are some of the biggest mistakes. I'll give you a quick example. In a recent nominating committee process I was working with, of the 734 submissions we received for the open board seat, or the upcoming open board seat for appointment, only 18 people of the 734 actually submitted properly. And that's a testament, again, to those thinking that just because I was in a senior level position, or I had the C in front of my title, that it's a foregone conclusion that I'm ready for the boardroom, and it's not. There's no easier way for someone like me that's doing that vetting process and even the packaging to size up a candidate. And I'm to the point now, Ron, where I don't care if somebody calls themselves aspiring or experienced director. I'm looking more so at, do they view board directorship as a discipline? And anybody who views board directorship as a discipline will have done the research to package themselves properly and understand the increased responsibilities that have been put on directors and overall boards today. It's absolutely incredible from 10 years ago to today, what these how these responsibilities have increased. It really is a massive increase in not just time commitment required, but also the amount of areas and what we call governance simultaneity. All of these things happening in a simultaneous way. How does a great director deal with all these things in terms of prioritization and understanding how they integrate and understanding the knock-on effects of these things that reach the boardroom?
Wow. I never would have thought, before we met and trying to understand the complexities of choosing a board member, versus just because I always call it, you have the initials behind your name. And, I'm supposed to be prepared to do that. So the one trick pony I come in from finance and everything I'm concentrating on is that.
Yeah, it may be worthwhile, Ron, to mention in that packaging. So, and we go in depth in this in the course, and it's truly looking at not only how should you package yourself, but what is the modern day board appointment process? What is someone like me as an evaluator looking for? And there's a few things in this. And part of the reason, let me first start by saying that one of the main reasons that you don't send a resume, number one, for a board role or even for a C-level role is that, let's not forget, resumes were designed for employee level positions, not senior leadership positions. These years I worked here, then I got promoted. These years I worked here. That's not pulling out any of the governance and strategy acumen that you have, number one. And it's also not making it easy for the evaluator to understand the areas that you correlate, the level at which you correlate your governance and strategy knowledge to. On top of that, the board documents truly bring out something else, or a few other areas that are quite important. One is your core leadership traits. So one of the big things in coming to a conclusion on who's going to be that first round of director interviews, who's going to make the cut for that first round, which I believe, quite frankly, Ron, that getting to the interview today for a board role is harder than getting the appointment. I truly believe that. I see that, because once you get to the interview, it's really yours to win or it's yours to lose. The hardest part for most people today, and this is globally, is actually getting through that first impression and moving to that first level of vetting and making it to the interview. And for someone that's packaged properly and understands what an evaluator such as me is looking for, if they can get to that face-to-face, they likely have it, right? They have all the background that they need to give that impression and show that they are a leader. They have the governance background, and they have obviously the strategy background also. So hence the reason of that first impression, as they say, and I hate to use cliche statements, but you never get a second chance to make a first impression. That has never been more true than it is in the board directorship realm and the board candidate realm right now.
So getting that interview, that's a closing deal. It's up to you to close it to get that.
Yeah,
So
I think so. And I believe that if you are packaged properly and you understand the workings of a proper director interview and the types of questions you're going to be asked and why, and not just treat them as monolithic questions and monolithic answers, but how are you including things such as values and culture in your leadership style? Your board documents, for example, even before you get to the interview, we include something called your core leadership traits. This is linking your values-based decisioning model to how you lead. It's also looking at what I mentioned a moment ago of how are you expanding from just a viewpoint of having one expertise area and showing it through what we call your three minors, that you correlate 3 expertise areas to common board committees. Now I know where you can fit not just on one committee, but also where you bring the depth and not be that, as I said, the one-trick pony coming in, but you have coverage and balance, as we call it in board directorship, board architecture. What other areas do you bring to the table? And that's really the diversity of thought and the diversity of expertise we're looking for in today's appointments.
Yeah, when you mentioned that one trick pony, I come in with finance and I can only do finance. But if you mentioned earlier the horizontal knowledge approach and and understanding that. So the vertical is just all I do is finance, but here's what else I bring to the table, and I've come in under that that trajectory of just finance. Is that kind of the way it works?
That's correct. So the horizontal, you're dead on, and that is typically what most boards were looking for. They were looking for the generalist. This is years ago. They were looking for the generalist that could come in and weigh in on conversations, but maybe not be a subject matter expert in 1 or 2 or 3 areas. The way that the proper board director and board candidate packaging happens today is that we obviously want to know what that end-to-end horizontal knowledge is, but we also then want to understand the vertical knowledge areas, and the vertical knowledge areas should correlate to expertise areas that have then again a direct correlation to board committees. Make no mistake, in a properly architected board, the majority of the work happens in the board committee areas. That's the proper structuring and operations of a board. By the time a board meeting comes around, typically those are summaries of what's been happening offline in the board committee meetings. That's the proper acumen and board and structuring of the actions. So why then wouldn't we, and this is a rhetorical question because we do this today, but even years ago, why wouldn't we then evaluate a board candidate, aspiring or experienced, in their ability to serve in a committee, and maybe not even one committee, but possibly two and maybe even three committees, or at least know when somebody maybe reaches, some boards have terms, not just in the overall term of serving on that board, but the time frame they can serve in specific committees. Why wouldn't I, as an evaluator, extend that ability for that person that has all that local knowledge now to serve on two, maybe three different committees across a certain period of time? This is all leading to that diversity and depth of the candidates that we look for today. And a properly packaged candidate can get that across without me even asking the question of what we call your board director persona. Now I can move as an evaluator directly into questions that are more pertinent to those criteria areas of expertise.
Would that require a promising executive to have had board experience? And that could be, you got the labels on your name, and maybe once a quarter at an offsite, you do a presentation to the board. Should an aspiring executive have board exposure before?
Great question. So I'm going to answer this in two pieces, and it again comes back to proper board candidate packaging. The first is looking at everything you do and how you talk about your experience and your expertise, and how you package that in a written way. And we call this your career trifecta. And it works extremely well for board candidates. This is a balance between three areas that you're always evaluating for yourself. First is in your board, your career trifecta. First is your expertise, what you know. Typically that's through formal education channels. Typically that's through areas of just how you've gained that knowledge. We'll call that your expertise as one of the legs of that triangle. The second area is your experience, how you've applied it. What has been the application of that expertise that you have? Now, most folks, when they package themselves, especially for board roles, they sort of stop there. They say, because, well, my title, my expertise, and my experience are going to carry me through to the end. I can tell you, when you get down to the last three candidates in an appointment process, there's one last area of that career trifecta that is coming more into play, and that's what we call proof. Proof is the certification or the formal aspects of any type of certification that relates back to your board area, your board knowledge base. And what that tells us is a few things. One is that if somebody as a board candidate or a board director has the learning mindset, it shows to me that they understand that they have not necessarily reached the pinnacle of their career. Some people used to view it, well, the minute I get the board role, that I've reached the top level of my career. I don't require any more training. And what they don't realize is that the need for training becomes exponential at that point. I mean, there's so many things that come into the boardroom today that you can use that not just to prepare yourself and understand modern day board practices, and packaging, but also get across to an evaluator that you are of an ongoing learning or continuous learning mindset. Extremely important.
You know, that learning mindset is, I did a project in Muscat, I was telling you earlier, and that was one of the things I mentioned. Is that, fixed mindset. You're doing a job, you do the job 9 to 5, you go home, but you want to progress beyond that. And my thought is always think beyond this job, and how can you sell that? And the only way you're going to be able to do that is pull your head up from time to time and see what's out there. So when you talk about trying to, that learning mindset is that you're reading all the time. I've often said that my level of learning is more intense now than it was when I got out of university.
Absolutely.
Because I read everything. I read everything about areas I'm concerned, even things that have no relation to what I do.
There's an interesting, I agree with you, Ron. There's an interesting correlation that we have made over the years just through our data and having worked with so many candidates and nominating committees and boards. I think now it's over 800 different boards around the world we work with in a formal way. But in throwing those numbers out there, there's an interesting indicator in this, in that directors that are of the learning mindset typically are of lower ego, which means that in the boardroom, the communication works better. And if you think about it, it's a pretty obvious correlation, but we don't use it enough as it relates to evaluating a director or a board candidate. So someone that is open to the fact that they don't know something and they have to continuously learn and know that there is evolution of every single industry and knowledge area we could ever think of, and it's sped up right now. That mindset leads to a director asking the right questions. They don't make assumptions, is my point. They make less assumptions. And it also breaks down that barrier that by asking a question, some senior leaders feel that they're going to expose themselves if they don't know the answer to it. So we use this as an indicator in the board candidacy process to see, is this person viewing not only board directorship as a discipline by going for formal training and having certifications in those areas, as it relates back to what I mentioned as your career trifecta, but also are they of the mindset that it's above and beyond that? They have to stay up to speed. The board realm, Ron, is truly changing at an unbelievable speed, mainly due to the fact that even as recently as 12 plus years ago, boards could get away with the closed door secretive meetings and they only had to then provide the report to their shareholders. Well, today we have some pretty noisy stakeholders out there that can make your board's life pretty miserable and your organization's life pretty miserable in one tweet. So this has to be understood, and that's why we look at a much deeper train and look for a much deeper criteria in what a board director is today, what their board director persona is, how they package themselves, and do they realize that board directorship is truly a discipline, not just a rite of passage because you've had a previous role or title that sounds good.
Yeah, I was laughing when you said that, because when you said that, last week when I did this project, and I was saying that probably one of the most important phrases for a leader is to say, "I don't know, but we can figure it out together." And then you mentioned the aspect of asking questions. My thought has always been, if you ask powerful questions, that has better of an impact than you standing on a podium trying to lecture to someone. That
Absolutely.
Question process, yes.
Yeah, and some leaders do have an issue switching on what we call the 80-20. So, typically in prior management and leadership positions, commonly 80% of the time you're giving direction and answer, and 20% of the time you're asking questions. Well, when you reach obviously the senior C levels, and of course in the boardroom, that 80-20 has to switch. It's got to be 80% questions, 20% comments and direction, even to the point where we recommend, just for and especially if the board is meeting with or somebody is presenting from the organization to the board, even if you know the answer as a director, you should typically formulate that comment in a question format due to the fact that it allows the person that answers it to have ownership of what they are describing.
Exactly. You talk about the change. We mentioned 10 years ago, prior years or whatever. Have you seen a different thought process in selecting boards pre-COVID, post-COVID? Because there's been a lot of turnover in the so-called C-suite, during this period. And from what I'm in my reading, I'm picking up change, not comfortable with change, a different innovative approach than the normal process. So what have you seen from the board level pre-COVID to where we are today?
Yeah, and there's been some massive changes. In fact, at Pfister Strategy Group, we've really seen a difference in the types of consulting and advisory engagements that we're being asked to help with. So number one, let me answer this at a high level to say what changed, and I'll give you some of the anecdotal type of experiences that we saw in the early stages. So first off, when COVID first hit, it exposed a few different areas, and I'll make the correlation here in an interesting way, I hope. One is that many directors were what's called overboarded, meaning that they were assigned and appointed to too many boards. And when all the emergency meetings started happening and the directors were required for double, even triple the base amount of time, we typically view the average amount of time for a director of any entity type, nonprofit, private, public, companies at about 250 hours a year, assuming that they are serving on at least one committee. That's usually the average. But think about that. That's during normal operating times. That's not during times of crisis, such as COVID. So all of a sudden, these directors that were appointed on 8, 9, 10 different boards, these organizations in some cases didn't even have a quorum in their board meetings to make a vote because the directors are not available because they were spread so thin. So the first thing to mention here is that one big change that has come from COVID is the nominating and vetting processes are much more closely involved in understanding and getting to an answer of how much time does this director have to commit to us, both during normal operating times and during any type of crisis that could come up. Are they available? Can we pick up the phone and schedule a impromptu meeting on Sunday night at 8 p.m. or on Wednesday morning at 5:30 a.m.? Is the director available? It sounds so simple, but the amount of directors that just didn't have availability during COVID, it was a exacerbating point of these boards not being able to really be as effective as they should have been during the early stages of COVID. So many boards today, even in their bylaws, are adding, and I work on quite a few of the bylaws and review them. They're adding in that if they appoint a director to their board, a new director, that director could not be serving on two, possibly three other boards. So they limit them. They limit them basically. And if they do go over that, they have to resign from the current position that they're in. I think it's quite a good practice and a good trending currently.
Yeah. Spread yourself too thin. Yeah. I just wanted to mention that a friend of mine years ago as he was transitioning out from C-suite level, his goal was to max it out, get on as many boards as possible. That was one of the things I thought about, because I said there's these impromptu meetings and all these things that come up. How could conflict of interest can come into play? Maybe that's not a good strategy to try and do that if that's my first level and I want to look around and get other assignments. So I'm glad you covered that.
Yeah, one of the great things, though, if you use that baseline of 250 hours a year, and we talk about in the course what that breakdown is. So typically just for base board duties, we would say about 200 hours a year, and that would include everything from the preparation, the digging into the organization, of course, in a proper way of noses and fingers out, as a director should do. And what is missed many times is the amount of research that a director needs to do. In fact, this is something I look for in the interviews. I ask many candidates directly, how do you see, what is your understanding of a time commitment for a proper serving properly on a board, and how would you break down that time that you're describing right now? So I'm looking typically for roughly an answer saying about 200 hours a year for my base duties. For every committee I'm on, I tack on 50 hours. And for every chair role of a committee, I tack on maybe another 10, 15, 20 hours a year for that. That's one piece of it. Now, if we go into and that multiplies, of course, depending on the number of committees based on that formula I just mentioned, right? If you're adding another committee, you tack on another 50 hours to that. So some directors are not properly estimating what the time commitment should be on these boards. So I'll ask that question first before I even tell a board candidate what our expectation is. I want to see if they are of the mindset and understand what it takes to be a great director. And then from there, as I mentioned, I'll ask the question of what do you view that breakdown of time as? And one of the main words I'm looking for in that, anybody can regurgitate the fact, oh, that's time for committee meetings and board meetings and reviewing the board book a week in advance of the board meeting and digging into the strategy and matching that to the goals of the organization and making sure our governance model is touching on the right areas to give us transparency into the organization. Those are all the given answers. But if I'm not hearing that word of research, I dig into it because I know that's a missed point. You can't just operate in a bubble. You have to understand the research from not only what your organization is doing, but what's the industry doing? What are your competitors doing? What are totally disparate industries doing that touch on some similar technology components that you use in your organization, for example? This is the bane. What I'm describing right now, Ron, is a major struggle for those that feel that they need to implement AI and machine learning in their environments, but nobody else in their industry has done it yet. But what they're missing is that the research would show them that there are parallel areas in other industries that they could be talking about for their industry itself. That's where the research comes into this, is one common and current example that we're seeing.
Yeah, I'm getting so many flashbacks because when you talked about industry analysis, I'm surprised in talking to senior level people when I said, "Give me a full breakdown of your industry. What is it transitioning to? What are the implications?" And all those just simple questions, and they are flustered in trying to come up with some answer because they're focused in what they're doing and they're not looking out to see what that is.
Yeah, this what you're mentioning is a testament to proper board architecture. Let me quickly make the correlation to this. So today, best practice of a board in any industry is that it dictates that no more than 25% of the appointed directors in that organization are from the industry in which that organization serves, which means that you're allowing for 75% of the remaining board to have industry outlook and experience and inputs from something totally disparate from the industry that board is serving. That's how we force the diversity of thought into the boardroom today, by ensuring that we're not a board made up of all people from the same industry. And we see this in certain industries are terrible at this. Life sciences and pharmaceutical, these boards are so monolithic, I'll use that word again, in how they're structured, that they are really challenged to understand what's happening outside of their life sciences type of bubble.
Mm.
We do that by directly infusing a different approach into the architecture, which again is showing the importance of that board architecture component.
Yeah, I want to throw in something on the project I worked on in Singapore with a client, and the C-suite only wanted to pull in executives who had industry experience in the banking structure, bank on the corner. Meanwhile, the transformation is to the cloud. But when you looked at the makeup of the senior level, everybody started from, I'm going to say teller, and worked their way up. So even in the digital transformation, they said, oh, they must have experience in this. Why is that? Because that's not the bank of the future.
Yeah, exactly.
That mindset mentality of the industry, and you're locked in on that as if that's going to be the model for years to come.
Yeah, most organizations in today, and this is probably we can go back just quickly to that question of what's changed in the last 10 years for a director. What's changed is that at the core of most companies, I don't care what industry or industry vertical you tell me, at the core of most companies, they are technology and marketing companies. Regardless of their product and services, they have to have a baseline understanding, functionality, and vision for the future of the technology and the marketing, or really the targeting, I'll call it, to be a little more exact. So knowing that, we say to ourselves, well, how do we ensure that we get these different viewpoints? How do we ensure that we have this understanding of trending in other industries and what other industries are leveraging for the technology, for the packaging, for the marketing areas? You do that by not creating an echo chamber of everybody with the same background. And it really is incredible when some of the boards we work with, they move from that everybody has to be from this industry mindset to, all right, makes sense. We don't need more than 3 people all from the same industry because we have that expertise, right? We have it through the CEO in most cases. We have it through our 2, 3, or 4 board members with background in that industry. What else are we missing? Well, we get that now from the directors that come from other industries.
Okay, cool. Let's take a commercial break, and then we're going to come back, and I want to follow up on the 25% number.
You got it.
Okay, cool.
Identify and book the world's best speakers for your next event. MENA Speakers is the leading speakers and MC bureau in the Middle East. We bring global talent to the region and have established the region as a key global hub for speakers. Inspire and motivate your audience. Find exactly what you are looking for by working closely with us to assist you in understanding the cost-benefit analysis tied to selecting a speaker for any event. Ensure that your audience is educated, engaged, and empowered. Connect with us for a quick response and tailored advice. Book your speakers now.
And we're back. I wanted to follow up on the 25%. So your 25% base knowledge of an industry, 75% would be coming from all different other regions. I want to take it down one level of an org, -1 from the board. or C-suite from the board. Should that model also be used in bringing in executives to fill those roles on the C-suite? Should that be comprised of people that come in from a different industry? The skill is there, but the industry is missing. Can you give us some kind of insight on that? I'd love
I would say what I'm proposing is more directly correlated to the boardroom. I like to see, of course, a CEO who has deep expertise and experience in the industry in which that company serves. There's a few other roles where I'm a little more open to somebody coming from the industry. That could be a CHRO or someone with human capital backgrounds in one of those C-level roles. But typically, I don't use that as the standard for the C-level, but I do use that absolutely as a standard for the boardroom.
Okay, cool. So what are some misconceptions of executives, like myself, who maybe would want to explore a board role? What are misconceptions that you see as you're interacting with people?
Yeah, and there are quite a few out there, and we see this all the time in the questions we're asked within the course. So one of the big ones is that, well, I know that I can't serve on a board unless I previously served as CEO. That's a big one. And that is absolutely not true. It has not been true for the last 10, 15 years. In fact, we purposely design boards in the modern fashion, the board architecture modern fashion today, where I don't like to see more than 3 previous CEOs on a board. And that includes if the current CEO of the organization is actually serving, right? We have enough, if we're truly sticking again with the diversity of the viewpoints and the diversity of perspective, I don't want everybody in the boardroom to have the CEO lens coming to all of our issues and escalations in the boardroom. I want multiple different entry points, as we call it, to any type of challenge or problem.
Okay.
So that's one. Another that we are in a totally different realm right now. So, and I know anybody who's a board candidate and maybe has not served previously on a board before in your audience is probably going to smile when I say this, that another misconception is that you have to have previously served on a board to land a board seat now. Let me give you a great stat right now, and it's fresh in my mind because of a speaking engagement I did this week. So in roughly the middle or the early stages of 2022, we're waiting for the 2023 report to come out on 2022 currently, but I'll give you some recent trending. A report by Heidrick & Struggles that came out in early 2022 that looked across 2021 said the following. In the US, and we'll use the US just as a control group for now, in the US in 2021, 43% of the appointed directors in Fortune 500 companies had never previously served on a public company board before. Wow. When I first saw these numbers, I thought it was a typo. I said, did they add an extra digit in there, right? I could see 3 or 4%, but not 43%. Yeah. And lo and behold, that is the proper number. That's the correct number. So what that tells us is the following. It says, number one, that just because you served on a previous board or many boards or are considered to be what we call a career director does not mean that you're going to edge out and win the appointment over someone who is an aspiring director today. Okay. This is a testament again to the fact that if you're packaged properly, you understand modern day board directorship, and you have both the horizontal and the vertical lens of your expertise areas, you can easily edge out and get the appointments as an aspiring director over an experienced director.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so those are the 2 big ones. There's other small ones, such as this misconception of you have to be retired to serve on a board. In fact, we tell people very clearly and directly in our packaging, never use the word retired again. Never. Because if you're serving on a board and you're telling me you're retired, so you have the time now, that comes across possibly as saying, well, you're not going to put in the same amount of effort as you would have put in your previous roles or your titles, right? So we eliminate the word retired from all of the packaging. And I think it's a smart thing to do. And then just that there's a low time commitment, still there's this mindset or this misconception that when you're on a board, you show up for board meetings, it's, dedication for 4 periods of time a year or 6 periods of time for the board meeting. And then you're on your own for the middle amount of time between those meetings. Yeah. So those are the big ones. And I'd probably throw the learning, some people, although this has changed drastically in recent years, but what we mentioned earlier about once you reach the board level, you no longer have to learn things.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. That learning piece is a lifestyle that has to continue until the eyes are closed for good.
Absolutely.
So many times leaders forget that. They forget that you have to, and I mentioned earlier, I think I spend more time studying and reading when I was in university, because I winged that.
Yeah, I understand. And there are folks that think that because they are almost protected in their positions, and that you could say that of many C-level and many board directors, there is a level of protection in those particular positions. And that can create this false sense of security. But at the end of the day, especially in public companies, you have two main groups, your shareholders and your stakeholders, that are evaluating you at all times. Yeah. And in that process, I believe that the continuous learning and knowing that it never stops. Let's put it that way, as you're alluding to, it never stops and never can stop.
Never stops. So let's talk about you. What is the most important leadership lesson you've learned over your career? And kind of, you know what, let's back it up. Let's start from, how did you get to where you are now as a board advisor? Because I just can't put out a shingle now and say, board advisor. How do you get there from university to working? And walk us through your career journey.
Yeah, so for me, I actually come from a very technical background. So my background is science, engineering. Those areas to me were the technology areas were very, it was very obvious to me early on in my career that I was working with a group of extremely talented and knowledgeable people as it related to the technology components or the technical components. But when it came to leadership and governance and strategy, that was a whole different world. And I hate to generalize that, but it was true. It was just the way, in most companies, those with the most technical knowledge were the ones, years ago, the ones that got promoted into the management positions. And just because you had the title of manager or leader next to your name, it didn't necessarily mean you were a great manager or a great leader. So that more technical background pointed out the need for better governance, better strategy, better leadership, quite frankly. In the beginning, it was more so directly applied to the technology verticals, certain technology verticals. And that's really what got me into the more formal understanding of, how do you really make an organization hum? How do you make it efficient? How do you make it effective? How do you attract and retain the right people without having to double their salaries, right? How do you make somebody feel ownership for them wanting to be there and being part of the solution and saying, you know what, even if I have another offer from another company, regardless of additional perks, I just love the people I work with. That to me was a skill set that in the engineering background that I have, in science background, it wasn't something that was deeply entrained into the teachings. So that's what really drew me probably more so away from the technical field areas, more into the leadership and the management, the governance, and the strategy areas. Now, for me, one of the things I just absolutely fell in love with 20 years ago was strategy. And everybody will tell you they're an expert in strategy. In fact, I'm going to share with you, Ron, one of the questions that's is backing up what I'm saying right now. And this is the question I ask around the 10-minute mark of any board director interview that I do. I don't care if you're an aspiring or an experienced director. This is the deciding question and your answer that if it doesn't go well, I end the interview. So I'm becoming known now for ending board interviews in 10 minutes. Because quite frankly, I know if they can't answer this question, let's not waste anybody's time. Here's the question. And I'm comfortable sharing it because it can't be faked. You can't fake this even if you know my question. Tell me about your understanding of the interrelationship between strategy and governance. Tell me about your understanding of the interrelationship between strategy and governance. Right? Now that question seems quite easy, and it should be. If you are a true leader, you've actually built out not only the questions that you ask, but your governance model around the strategy. Now, for a board, what they need to understand is that once the goals are set for the organization, the board is responsible for validating the goals on an ongoing basis, not just set them and check on them a year from now, but every time a director is thinking about what they're doing, they should be saying to themselves, how does this support in some way the goals that the organization is looking to reach? Now, once those goals are set and you ask yourself that question and you spend a few minutes pondering that and looking at recent examples of issues or escalations or challenges, or even triumphs for that matter, let's not only focus on the negative, the good things that are happening in the organization. The remaining 98% of a board director's time is tying their governance, their questions and their governance model to the strategy. The strategy is the how we are going to reach the goals. From now on, I ask your listeners, Ron, to say to themselves, anytime I hear the word strategy, I'm going to replace that with the word how. And if you do that, you truly understand the overlay of governance to strategy. And it's totally that very simple understanding. In fact, in our board course in certification, session 4, the whole session is dedicated to this. This is one of the main failure points. Anytime you hear next time of an organization that failed because of governance failures, right, or governance gaps, if you truly dig into those, they were not governance failures, they were strategy failures. And it was also a failure of the overlay of strategy and governance and their interrelationship together. If a director cannot answer that question without a long pause, without a delay, without trying to come up with some answer that sounds great, that's going to try to baffle me with all of these great buzzwords, the interview's over, quite frankly, because this is your role. 99% of your role as a board director is to understand the question I just asked and apply it properly. So why bother with an interview past 10 minutes if you can't answer that in a coherent and very easily understood way? We burn this into the minds of our registrants in our board course and certification by showing a very simple diagram of how to view this. Most people are visual. So if you get what I'm talking about in a visual picture, you will never stumble with that question, and you'll know that every question and every governance type of approach or probing that you're doing in the boardroom is truly built off of the areas that you need to know about. It's that interrelationship of governance and strategy that's so important.
Yeah, I do a lot of strategy work too. I love the strategy how. I love that connotation because you and I can come up with a strategy, but the key is an execution. How are we going to do that?
That's right. That's right. And different organizations that have the same goals can reach those same goals with a different strategy, with a different how. One organization may have the budget to go and create some sort of automated program that helps them to reach their goal, right? They can invest $200,000 into that. A similar competitor organization may not have $200,000 to invest, but they're able to hire 3 or 4 people over the course of 6 months or a year to do exactly the same thing. Yes, it's a little more manual, but they have both reached the same goals. So let's not confuse that. The goals can be the same for an organization, but the how they get there can be different. And there's nothing wrong with that. The strategy should always be compared back to budget, scope, and time. So the director mindset right now, if you tell me what your goal is, and then you tell me your strategy or your how, the next thing I'm going to focus on is budget, scope, and time. There's nothing that falls outside of those 3 areas.
Okay.
That's the governance lens of this from a director's standpoint. Always thinking about budget, scope, and time to anything that's uttered in that boardroom. That should be the thought process as it relates to the governance questions.
Okay, I have another question, a point to throw in from that. So, what about KPIs? Do we do a cadence? Say first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, we will have completed X, Y, Z, and this number is going to be the success modeling and those kind of things. How does that factor in?
That's the measurement point. So, if we look at this very simply in that same diagram that I'm trying to paint the picture of right now, on the left-hand side sits the goals. On the right-hand side sits the tasks or the milestones. In between that sits a double pointing arrow that's your strategy. So from a board's lens or a proper governance lens, the board will measure the progress against the strategy in support of the goals based on what's been accomplished or what's scheduled to be accomplished. So, and I'm not talking about that necessarily at the task level. A good board will know what tasks to roll up into milestones that they can measure, and that's the measurement point of the progress. And a board should never get bogged down into the individual tasks of what went wrong, what went right. It's just, has XYZ date milestone been met? And is the next 2 milestone dates of XYZ, are they on schedule to be met? If they are, we move the conversation on. That drill down into what they are and the understanding of the task deliverable areas, that's way off track for the governance level that a board should be getting to.
Okay, cool. So let's talk about the elephant in the room, because in organizations today, there's so much discussions on DEI. And, when you look at the recent appointments of boards, I saw a number the other day. I don't forget what the number is, but for non-white candidates, it has increased exponentially because of the so-called representation of bringing in different voices into that room.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I'll start this at a very early point. So for me, always the diversity component was baked into proper board architecture. And let me explain why this was. So for many of those that are in my same industry of building of boards and evaluating boards or doing board architecture assessments, this is something we were like, well, yeah, of course this should happen, right? Who's not doing this right now? And we break this down even to an earlier point to say that diversity of perspective leads to diversity of thought, which leads to elevated outcomes.
Ooh.
Diversity of perspective leads to diversity of thought, which leads to elevated outcomes. So for us, we were always looking for diversity in the boardroom, and not just from a standpoint of color of skin or geography or the more physical traits, but saying to ourselves, somebody that comes from an environment that's different than others, that brings the diversity into the boardroom. And I say this jokingly, but hear me out on this. I make this point in the course by saying that one of the most diverse people I've ever met in my life was a 75-year-old bald white man. And they say, well, how the heck is that diverse? And I say, let me explain to you why. He grew up with 7 siblings, homeless on the streets, started working when he was 3, right? And all the money he earned until he was 15, he gave to his mother to help feed his siblings, right?
Wow.
That's a diverse viewpoint of somebody to say, how are we creating an environment? Let's compare it to the employee workforce. How are we creating the comfort level that an employee knows that we will always look out for them? We're not going to get to that point. Now, I use that kind of with the tongue-in-cheek and anecdotal type of way of saying that, but it points to the fact that when we talk about diversity, we are looking much deeper and can leverage those of what I call historically underrepresented populations in the boardroom. We can get those viewpoints into the boardroom by targeting specifically those groups. So for us, again, in the board architecture realm, we were always like, no kidding. We've been doing that for years, right? So that to me covers, and I'm happy to see it's a trend right now because it truly does bring the depth of experience and the depth of knowledge into the boardroom. Now, what I've just covered, Ron, is the diversity and the inclusion areas. What I'll touch on just very high level without, hopefully angering anybody is I'll say that when equity is applied properly, it can be a great stepping stone to get these underrepresented populations in the boardroom. But if you ask me the question, is equity in the boardroom working right now? I would tell you it's been an absolute failure. And it's been a failure because if we focused on the diversity and inclusion, it would work perfectly. The equity component of this is actually making some boards, forcing boards into a decision to possibly appoint someone that does not have the expertise or the experience. And they're losing the mindset of saying that equity was helping that person reach the level of those they will be working with if we apply this to the boardroom right now. So a properly applied equity model would be, this is a person that has the right mindset, the right approach, their communication skills are great, but we want to educate them before their appointment to make sure that they're going to be a great contributing member to the boardroom and understand how a board should operate properly. So in order to support the equity component, we are going to purchase a program. We get this all the time now where organizations will say, we have an internal leader we want to appoint to the board, but we want to put them through the program, the board education program we just spoke about. The equity component of that is truly that the organization is paying that for that person to take that program, to take that course. Now, by the time they come up, they're not entering a realm of a boardroom where they feel like they are the token representative of an underrepresented population, but they are respected. They are a contributing member, and they know how to take their expertise and their experience and apply that in that row or that area I mentioned, that the diversity of perspective, diversity of thought, and propose things that this board can truly rally around rather than just being an idea that wasn't formulated in a way that got the board behind it. That's what we're seeing today, quite frankly, and it's a large portion of the what I would call the remedial work that we're doing in the consulting and the advisory area is to get the boards to the point where they feel like they're operating at the level they were prior to some recent appointments.
Wow. We can go on and on and on. This is such an interesting discussion. And, I do this every week, but this has to be, in the top few that we've had. Closing this out, last question is back to you. Tell me about important influences you've had in your life. That could be grandfather, mother, whoever it is, father. Who shaped Mark?
Yeah. Well, I'll say this, and I love the question. And let me just use the word mentor for a moment. And this goes back to the learning mindset. I have, at any point in my career from the age of 22 to today, I have always had someone I've looked up to that I would view and ask them specifically, will you be a mentor to me? And I will do this until the day I die, quite frankly. I don't care if I'm 90 years old, and I'll look for a mentor always that's older than me, because my correlation is that they have more life experience if they're older, right? So, if I live to be 100, which is probably not possible, but if I do, I'm going to be looking for someone who's very old at that point to be a mentor to me. But there's 2 or 3 of those mentors throughout the years that have just been instrumental in ensuring that I'm thinking about things correctly, that helping me to avoid pitfalls, quite frankly, in what they've done, and they're kind enough to share the mistakes they've made. That to me is a great mentor. Yeah. And I think that idea of having a mentor and even being able to approach someone and ask them, some people would have too high of an ego to do this. They'd say, well, I'm a board director. Why the heck would I go and ask someone to be my mentor? That's going to,
my thinking is, I have initials behind my name.
Yeah. So, do I lower myself by asking for a mentor because, I'm going to create this subservient relationship? But someone who thinks that way, again, that you have to get past the ego components of that and think about the fact of what is that type of relationship you could build with somebody. So what typically those mentorship relationships become are peer relationships, where in the future, where then you start to share opportunities and knowledge between one another. So you're almost building out a very tight network group by doing that. And I'll share one thing with you that I always did at every point. Anytime I was going to approach somebody to act as a mentor to me, in my suit jacket, in both pockets, I'd have a letter in an envelope that was my yes envelope, and then the other side was my no envelope. So if they said that they would be a mentor to me, and we set a time frame, maybe 24 months or indefinitely, I would reach to my left-hand coat pocket, and that would be the yes one, thanking them, right? And if it was a no because they were too busy, the right-hand coat pocket would have if they answered no, and it would be a letter just asking them to reconsider for the following reasons. So,
that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and one of the times the no letter actually worked because they said, you know what? I get that this person, what they're looking for, I can make the time for this. I understand. I wish that some of them say, I wish I had done this when I was looking for mentors. So I just can't speak enough about having that sounding board in a protected way where it's not, public facing. It's not, it's your safe space to ask questions and how you can grow quite immensely by having that sounding board.
Okay. Mark, thank you so much. This has been an excellent interview, and I love the insight that you brought. There was so much that I learned from you as a result of this, because I had no idea, and I'm sure the vast majority of listeners had no idea as to the not really complexities, but understanding that. Give us your website so that someone can contact you.
Sure. It's pfisterstrategy.com. My name's spelled a little funny, so it's PFISTER strategy.com. And that includes everything we talked about today, from the speaking aspects to the consulting areas. And also, for those that have found value today in the topics of packaging yourself as a modern day director and learning modern day board operations, take a look also at the global education and certification that we host.
Okay, great. So we posted your website there for people to contact you, because this has been a tremendous learning opportunity for me. And the vast majority of my work, for the most part, is C-level inside of the organization, but this has really been a learning experience for you and I and Heidi can connect and have lunch or dinner in New York City when I'm back there next month.
Absolutely. Ron, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it very much, and I enjoyed our discussions too. Thank you.
Okay, I need you to hold on as we close out. I need to speak to you offline.